All right. So I think that we've kind of had enough time to let people filter in. So thank you for coming. Today, we will be sort of talking about how you can prepare for your summer internship. And so this program is primarily geared towards juniors and sophomores who have incoming like investment banking internships coming in. I mean, this also applies to private equity, but mainly just careers in finance, right? And so the way that this is going to be broken down is I'm going to talk a little bit about my internship experience and what that was like and kind of the lessons that I took away from that. And I'm also going to be walking through an Excel model or the structure of an Excel model that we use during my internship. And then at the end, we're also going to talk about a case study that I'm going to assign you guys. So it's like a mock intern project that you would get during your summer internship in investment banking or private equity to sort of get you guys in the right headspace and give you guys that kind of practice. And so for those of you who haven't met me already, my name is Knoton. I interned at JP Morgan in their investment banking division this past summer. And so I'm going to be sort of giving you guys like a little bit of like a rundown on what that experience was like and what lessons that you can take away from that. So yeah, this is kind of what the agenda is going to look like, and we're going to start off with what my experience was like. So when I talk about what I did over the internship, I think that a helpful way to sort of break it down is to understand what a day in the life kind of looked like, and then we could sort of go from there, right? So most days would usually start off at around 8 to 10, and so I would wake up at around 8 or 8:30, and I would usually wake up to maybe like 20 to 30 emails in my phone because over the night a lot of things had happened probably. And so you kind of want to filter through your inbox and see if there's anything urgent that you need to catch up on. And if there isn't, then you can sort of like, get ready and take your time getting into the office. And at least with me on the East Coast in New York, it was pretty customary to get in at around like 9 or 9:30. And most people honestly didn't even come into the office until like 10 or 11 a.m. because they would start working from home first and then they come in. I don't have too much visibility on what that looks like on the West Coast, as many of you might be going to like LA or San Francisco to do banking, but that's at least kind of what it was like in New York. Mornings usually start off pretty quiet, really pretty slow. I usually like check my inbox to see if there's anything that came in, and then I might work on something if I saw an assignment, or I would check in with my deal teams to see if there's anything that I can actively jump on, right? And so like throughout the morning, I might be working on something like tweaking a model or like working on a presentation. Hey guys, good to see you guys. And I would usually eat lunch at my, also feel free to come in this side. We have seats on this end as well. But yeah. And then I would usually kind of like, see if there's anything that I'm working on, like a slide deck or like a process update or tweaking a model. And I would usually want to be eating lunch at my desk so that I'm not like away from my setup in case there's anything urgent that needs to happen. And then from 2 to 4 p.m., I'd say that's probably when like the busiest time of the day is. Like that's after lunch, and that's when a lot of client meetings are going on. So I would usually be on these meetings, like taking notes, or I'd be working on like an assignment that I get from my analyst or associate. And then from 4 to 6, I think it's pretty much like a continuation of that like afternoon period, right? There's a lot of things going on. You're usually quite busy. But sometimes you would have like downtime in between different assignments, right? So when it comes to investment banking, you're not necessarily like 100% focused on working the entire time. And there are often moments in between where you're still waiting for an assignment or you've just given in something and you're waiting for feedback. At around 6 p.m., that's when our first meal credit hits. So at least with JP Morgan, I think this is relatively standard across the street. You usually get about $35 worth of meal credit to just like order your dinner. But the catch is that you have to stay until 9 p.m. for that to like be expensed. So that's kind of like the catch of that. At 6, you'd hear like everyone in the bullpen just talking about, oh, like what are we going to order for dinner? What do you want to eat? And a lot of people will be like heading down to the lobby to like pick up their food from DoorDash. After that, sometimes people feel like kind of sluggish and kind of tired, but like other people are kind of energized after dinner. And so it usually get like a pretty decent amount of work done from like 8 to 10 p.m. And then at 9 p.m., we had like a second meal credit that came in. Again, not sure what the policy is like depending on the firm, but overall, that's like a pretty good amount of money for you to spend on food. So if you are in investment banking and you're in the office all day at the very least, you probably don't have to spend that much money on food, at least over the summer and also like going into full time. By around like 10 or 11 p.m., I'd say probably like 80% of people have left. And so I think in investment banking, there's like this expectation that, the people are in the office till like 2, 3 a.m. And I think it's true that people are often working until 2, 3 a.m. Like that's not an uncommon thing. But I think more recently, people have shifted to sort of like working from home more. So people spend like less time in the office, which I think is like honestly better for mental health. And that's something that you could probably look forward to when you start full time. But as an intern, you generally want to be in the office as much as possible. So even though 80% of the full timers had left, like over 80% of the interns were still there. You kind of just want to be physically present. You want to show that you're engaged and you want to show that you're there to do the work. And so that's kind of what that looked like. And for us, most days ended around like 12 or 1 a.m. And then we kind of just go back home and, just restart the whole cycle all over again. And so kind of shifting focus on beyond like what a normal day in an internship looked like what are some things that I actually worked on, right? So like I was on the mergers and acquisitions team, which meant that I got to work on deals across many different industries. And so I was able to work on like a services deal that was quite large and quite complex. And that involved like a bunch of different teams, right? They were raising bonds, so they had to talk with DCM. There were like considerations of like flowback and how the stock would trade after the merger. So we had to talk with ECM. This was also like a cross-border transaction. So there was like foreign exchange involved. And we were working with the coverage side, so like the services coverage team. And so I think like that deal was really interesting because I got to see just all the capabilities of the bank just working together in tandem to make this thing happen. I also worked on a biotech deal, and that was really cool because I was like working directly with the founder and like understanding his mission and like why he wanted to sell his business. And then I also worked on an industrials company that was like a sponsor transaction. And so seeing the way that private equity firms evaluate deals and like engage in financial engineering was pretty interesting to see. And another big part of my summer was the intern project. So this is something that a lot of you guys will get. I think almost every firm has an intern project. Some don't, but I think like you can pretty much come in with the expectation that you need to have some sort of capstone project. So for us, they told us like, in week 3 of this week 9 internship, like, hey, this is a case that you have to work on, and then it's due like week 9 or something. And so for this, we had to engage in a fairness opinion, which is basically looking back at a past deal to see if the company was fairly valued. And we had to come up with things like public comps, a DCF, and an LBO analysis. Right. And so like this was something that we worked on throughout the summer. Right. We didn't really have like a dedicated time to do it. And I think with most firms, you probably don't have a dedicated time, but you kind of just need to work on it whenever you have free time. So a lot of us would come in over the weekends to work on this project. And so one mistake that some interns made is they would like pull an all-nighter like right before like a milestone was due, or even just like right before the actual presentation itself. And so obviously I really don't recommend that you do that because it's already stressful enough to be in banking. So try and space out the work as much as possible. And whenever you have free time, try to work on your project. And so another aspect of this is we had to present this live. So we would go into a room. Oh, were you raising your hand or just
Yeah, wondering, you said you would come in on the weekends, or some interns would come in on the weekends
Yeah.
to work on it. Was it not typical to have to come in on weekends slash night?
No one, okay, so this will vary a lot depending on the group or the firm that you're at, but no one asked us to come in on the weekends. Like no one was like, you should like be here like Saturday and Sunday. But we like chose to come in because we wanted to work on this and we like had other deal stuff that we wanted to catch up on. Because like the work from home setup that a lot of the interns had just wasn't as good as what some full-timers had. So it was like difficult to work from home. So we would go on the weekends. I went in every single weekend except for the last week. And that was a week after I finished my presentation for the project. And so, yeah, one of the biggest aspects of it beyond just building it and creating a slide deck and creating the model was we had to present it to full timers. So you would like walk into like a conference room. It's full of like analysts and associates. There's some VPs in there, sometimes an MD. And you would basically just present this deal as if you were talking to the company with a panel of investment bankers as well. And in some of our presentations, one of the global heads of banking actually sat in and he personally worked on that deal. And so that was pretty intimidating for some of us. And the way that it's structured is as you're talking, they will just like grill you and they'll ask you questions so that you have to know this deal and you have to know your model and what you're presenting inside and out. And so like overall, it is definitely important. But if all the rest of your work is good and your project is like kind of okay and it's like mid, then that's like fine. It doesn't have to be amazing. But you just can't like fail at it, right? But if you're kind of like a mediocre intern, but you have like a really, really good project that can like push you towards like potentially getting that return offer. So the project can be important, or it can also be like not as important depending on how well you do in the internship. And I'm sure like one thing that you guys are all curious about is like what my hours look like. And so I kind of like to keep notes. I like to keep track of things. And so this is a graph of like what my hours look like over the summer. And so you'll notice a lot of dips there where they kind of get lower. And that's usually because of like weekends. So like I might go in like at like noon or something and leave at like 7 or 8. So obviously I'm not working as much that day, but there are other days where I'm like working more. And so like this is a table of some of my longest working days. I think like the worst one was probably when I went in at around 9 a.m. and then I left at almost 7 a.m. the next day. And so that was like my first all-nighter. And yeah, this is kind of what my hours look like. Not to say that that's exactly what yours might look like as well, but an average day was like around 12 hours. And when you factor in the weekend work as well, that kind of signals to you that your average work day, like during the week, might start at like say 9 a.m. and then you might end at like 1 or 12. Noah, what's up?
What's happening if you're going in at like 7 a.m., 6:40?
Oh, those days I was just thinking like, okay, like I kind of want to just like get in while it's quiet and like just knock some work out basically. And some people also had like meetings that they had to attend really early, so they might go in like super early. But for me, I was just like, I'm pretty productive in the morning. The bullpen is super quiet. No one's really in until 10 a.m. So I figured I'd just jump in and do some work. Damon?
Yeah, so would you say that there's greater advantage in terms of getting a return offer in staying late, not showing up early?
Yeah, because like when I showed up early, no one knew I was there. You know what I mean? Right? So like whenever the full timers come in, you should already be there. Like ideally, you want to come in before the full timers, but they're not going to know how much earlier you stayed. I think what would count more is like kind of like staying later, right? So that's what I would say. But I think like it's important to note that you shouldn't like stay late just for the sake of staying late. If the full timers are left and like someone literally tells you, hey, like you're good to go home, like you should go home so that you can get some rest and that you're energized for the next day, right? So don't like kill yourself for no reason and just like really work yourself to the bone and stay later than you have to. But do make sure that like when you leave, the number of full timers there probably like isn't too high. So like you don't want to just be like 5 p.m. hits, you're out of there, right? So there's kind of like a balance to strike. And I think it's helpful. Oh yeah, Rachel.
What time did you come in at?
8. But I was lucky because that was near July 4th. And then so like we had something called pencils down, which is basically like at a certain hour they can't contact you anymore. And so like this is something that other firms have. It's called like protected Saturdays. Some firms will be like, okay, we like literally cannot contact you if it is like on a Saturday, but they can on like Sundays. I know with Bank of America, I don't know if anyone here is interning with them, but like they literally did not allow my friend to go into the office because they had the whole thing where the guy died, so they wanted to just like, keep it chill. So yeah, that's kind of like what that is. But anyways, with this, I felt like it'd be kind of good to visualize what 60 hours like actually looks like because we throw that word or like we throw that term around there. Oh, I worked 100 hours a week. But what does that actually like translate to concretely, right? So with 60 hours, that's like I think you could consider that like a good week in investment banking. So that's generally coming in at around 9 a.m., leaving at around 9 p.m. And you have like most of your weekend to yourself, maybe a little bit of work on like a Saturday or a Sunday. And most times, like, you would get like Friday nights off. I think that's one nice thing. At least with us, our policy was Friday at 6 p.m. was pencils down. So at Friday, 6 p.m., like our intern sponsor would be like, shoo, you guys like need to get out of here. We can't email you. We can't like send you pings and stuff. Like just enjoy your time. And then that grace period would last until 12 p.m. on Saturday, at which point like all the interns would kind of come back into the office and that like protected period would stop. Cyrus, what's up?
For those of us going to EBs,
Yeah.
like how, hearing from your friends who are at elite boutiques, like how can we expect this to look different?
With elite boutiques, I mean, honestly, I don't think there's like that big of a distinction necessarily. I haven't heard about, I know that protected weekends and protected like Saturdays and stuff happens at a lot of bulge brackets. I'm not exactly sure on the policies at EBs, but you'd probably be working like very similar hours, if not the same. But it also depends. Like if you guys have a lot of deals going on, that might be like way more. So it really, really depends on like how much activity you have going on at the moment. And so that is a good week or like a relatively chill week. And so this is what a bad week looks like. This is what 100 hours is visualized. Oh, and also I know the key might be a little bit small, but the blue is working and the red or the orange is like sleeping, and then green is like your leisure time. So when you have a 100-hour week like this, that looks like going in at 9, finishing at 2, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then working like honestly the majority of your weekend. And so this is not something that is like necessarily like typical. I probably only had 2 or 3 of these weeks over the summer. Um, but when you are in a deal sprint and when things are really, really intense and a lot of things are being asked of you, this can be kind of what it looks like, right? So definitely would emphasize the importance of taking care of yourself and like watching your mental health, which is something I'm also going to like talk a little bit more about as I get further. And I think a couple of important things that I wanted to note is the different checkpoints within your internship. So in most internship programs, there's going to be a midpoint check-in, and then there's going to be like a final like return offer day. So at the midpoint, you'll usually have like your supervisor or HR like sit you down in a conference room and they kind of tell you like how you're doing and provide you with feedback. So if you get something that is like really generic, like, oh, just like improve your attention to detail, and there's not like a lot of like specific negative feedback, like you're probably fine. Because at a lot of these meetings, they're like, oh, the like HR will tell the people like, hey, you have to give some piece of feedback. So if there isn't something like super negative and it's like kind of generally positive and nothing really specific on the negative side, like you're probably good. And then at the end of the internship, people are usually like called in to this office one by one and like they let them know like whether you get the return offer or not, right? And so I don't want to like put this out there if it isn't 100% true, but my experience at Morgan Stanley and JP Morgan is the people that got cut and didn't get a return offer had like really early morning meeting times because they just want to get it out of the way, right? So like I remember when they sent out the list like of the names and the times, the first two people, at least in my internship, they were the ones that got cut. And I can explain a little bit later, or I guess in this slide, like why they didn't get a return offer. So I can't know definitively, and like obviously there's some like gray area here. From what I know, one person didn't get a return offer because they performed really poorly on their intern project. So that's definitely really important, right? If you're kind of like on the borderline and you don't do well on your project, that's like one reason that you might get cut. And another person just like wasn't really a dependable intern. They wouldn't really respond to stuff and they wouldn't pick up work because they already had like a buy side opportunity afterwards. And so they didn't really care. And so that person got cut as well. And the return offer rates can vary like quite a bit. At some teams at my bank, it was like 60%, sometimes it's 75%. But I think like as a baseline, you can probably expect like 75 to 80% at least of your class will get to come back, but that'll depend on how the market is. Yeah. And so I think this is probably like what I think most people are here for, which is kind of like the tips on how to get a return offer and the things that you really want to keep in mind. And I also wanted to just like point out these slides are going to be sent out afterwards as well, and everything is going to be provided to you. So you don't have to worry about like taking pictures or like writing too extensive notes because this is also recorded on video. But I think like starting off with the most important thing is like your attitude, right? You want to show up to work. You don't want to be bored. You don't want to be entitled. You don't want to like complain about the hours, and you kind of want to bring like a positive energy to the floor. And definitely try to take on work as much as you can without necessarily like overstepping bounds. So like don't take on like a piece of analysis that you know you can't do, but you can ask them like, oh, how did this work, right? And like so you can build up to taking on that piece. And I think like but down here you can see like importance like critical or significant. And so I think these first two things are like probably the most important things that you need to think about. So the second of that is your work product, right? At the end of the day, they want to hire analysts that can put out good work. So doing something correctly slowly is always better than doing something incorrectly quickly. So take your time with the things that you work on, take ownership of your work, and definitely try and like pay attention to detail, right? So double check everything before you send it out. And one thing that I learned is like if you print out like a slide deck or you print out like a document or something, it becomes much easier to spot the mistakes because sometimes on a screen things kind of look the same and it's hard to miss details or it's easy to miss details. So printing out your work and checking it literally physically with a pen and paper before you send it out is going to be pretty important. Obviously, you want to be getting stuff done quickly if you can. But I would say, or I would argue that correctness and accuracy is always more important. Another thing I don't think is pretty important as well. Enthusiasm, I think that connects with like the right attitude. So you want to be, you want to show people that you're excited to be there, and that you're very grateful for the offer. And I think being communicative is like super important. So you really want to err on the side of like over communicating with your full timers. So like if someone sends you a message, like you say confirming receipt. Or if someone is like asking you to work on something, but you're actively on something right now, you don't like fade them and then like respond 30 minutes later. You're like confirming receipt. Just wanted to let you know that I'm working to push out this deliverable and I will get on that as soon as I'm finished with this. maybe in like 30 minutes to an hour, right? So you really want to communicate like where you're at and like what you're doing. And I think this is something that full-timers really, really look for in good interns, people that can communicate well and manage expectations, right? I think another big thing is like definitely being really coachable and very dependable. So being really coachable means that you're like receptive to feedback, you take what people say seriously and you try to implement it into your work. And being dependable is literally just like, are you paying attention to your outlook? Are you paying attention to your teams? Are you making sure that you're applying to everything that comes in, right? So staying on top of it is like very, very important, and it's one thing that people really look out for. And then finally, I think that these things are also like pretty important, but like the things I mentioned earlier take precedent over it. But there's a couple of things that like you want to keep in mind in terms of like social considerations. So like over the summer, you're going to be spending a lot of time with these people and you're going to be working with them a ton. So you are going to get very comfortable with people, but make sure not to get too comfortable because again, these are your coworkers. So like avoid kind of like crossing boundaries, avoid making offensive jokes. Like that's going to be pretty important. And I think like you definitely want to make sure like you're watching your liquor. Um, I think most of you will probably be 21 by the time you start your internships. And there's going to be a lot of like intern events, right? There's going to be like happy hours. There's going to be like, times where you go out after work to get drinks with your coworkers. And so make sure that you're not getting like too sloshed at these things. I know one person that blacked out and had to get carried home by their VP and they did not receive a return offer. So you don't want to be that person and you want to be careful about that. You also want to be friends with your co-interns as well. I heard anecdotally about this guy, like on the healthcare team, he would only kind of schmooze up to the full-timers and he wouldn't spend any time with his actual co-interns. And he didn't get the return offer, even though he had good work product, because they want to make sure that like as an incoming class, like you are socially cohesive and you like kind of like associate with each other, right? So make sure that you make friends with your co-interns, not for the sake of just getting a return offer, but because it's kind of like a nice thing to have. And I think like connecting with people, definitely very important. So as I'm sure many of you are aware, it is a good idea. It's a good idea to get coffee with the people on your deal teams. So like doing coffee chats, I'm sure you guys are tired of it from recruiting and getting this internship in the first place. But you want to make sure that you are doing coffee chats with people just so they know what your face looks like. Because at the end of the internship, they get together in a meeting and they discuss the interns. And if no one really knows who you are and your face isn't out there, that can put you at a disadvantage. So I would definitely try and prioritize like maybe doing like 2 or 3 coffee chats every week. And as you kind of think about like where you sit, right? Just understand where you are in the hierarchy, right? You are not on this pyramid. You are incoming, you are a summer analyst, right? You need to like earn your place in this hierarchy. So you have to understand, like, even if you've built up a lot of knowledge, and I'm sure a lot of you have, like you don't really know anything compared to the people that are working there full time. And so you kind of have to go forward with that humble attitude and be willing to take on basically anything that someone asks you to do. And then so kind of getting on with some of my lessons from my internship. Investment banking at the fundamental level, it's a client-facing industry. It's client services. So you need to make sure that the work gets done, no matter the cost. Things have to be done on time, things have to be done well. But I think that there is a line to be drawn, right? So you can expect to have late nights. But again, as I mentioned earlier, you don't want to work long hours just for the sake of working long hours, right? So the first time I pulled an all-nighter was because I got assigned like a pretty big piece of analysis that I had to do, and the guy gave it to me at like 10 p.m. And he wanted it by the morning. And so I think it honestly should have taken like 2 to 3 hours max, but I didn't actually know how to do it like correctly. But I could have saved myself a lot of time if I just kind of like gone to a full-timer first and asked them exactly like how they wanted me to approach it, right? So definitely work hard, but also work smart and don't be afraid to ask for help. But make sure when you're asking for help, it's not like overbearing and you don't want to be asking too many questions in a way that interferes with people's work. So you want to make sure you can find them at the right time to ask a question. Another thing that I learned is like you kind of have to always be on call when it comes to this internship. So there was like a Sunday where I went to, watch a movie with some friends. And in the middle of that movie, I got called in to go to the office to work on something. And then I came back and then I got called in again to go back to the office again to work on it, right? So there may be kind of like frustrating moments there. So always keep your phone, don't put it on do not disturb. Like make sure you can see any notification that comes in. I recommend like sleeping near your phone. So if you need to kind of just like wake up and check it real quick, like you can do that as well. And I remember like during that time, like there wasn't anybody else in the office on that Sunday except for my MBA associate, and we were kind of like working on that together. So another little bonus tip there is you should become friends with your MBA interns because they are going to be your associate when you come back full time. So it's really in your best interest to have a good relationship with that person. But I think on like the flip side, right? Yes, it is intensive. Yes, there are high expectations, and you're kind of being evaluated at essentially every point. But you also need to find time to take breaks and decompress from things, right? When it comes to investment banking, you are working long hours, but as I mentioned earlier, it's not like, 100% engaged the entire day fully, right? You're going to have moments where you send something to your VP and then, they have to wait to give you comments and then you have to wait for, you can work on something else. So during that time, maybe you can go on a walk, right? Stretch your legs, kind of get some air. Maybe you grab coffee with a full timer, or maybe you grab coffee with some other co-interns. Like make sure to find time to be yourself, find time to like take a breather because if you don't, you will burn out. I think like one of the biggest things that made my internship experience as nice as it was just like being friends with my intern class. So like when you guys start this summer, I really encourage you to be the person to start the group chat. Be the person to be like, hey, we should all grab drinks. Be the person to like introduce yourself and just try to put yourself out there because you realistically will be working with these people in the trenches for the next 2 years, right? There's a very high chance of that. So you want to make sure that you kind of set like a good impression and you like set a good like thing on the outset. And a lot of you will be going to like similar cities like San Francisco, LA, New York. Also recommend that you guys connect with each other while you're in the city, kind of like, have some friends there. Um, and yeah. And so I've made some really great memories with my co-interns. I think like that's one of the things that honestly made the internship bearable. Like if I was working with people I didn't like, I don't think I'd want to go back, but I do want to go back. So like we had this thing where like we on the weekends we started talking so much and the bullpen got so loud that we instituted a rule where there's 45 minutes where you have to be silent and then 15 minutes where you can talk. And if anyone violated the 45-minute silent period, they get slapped in the face, right? And so like that's one thing that we had. One of my co-interns was like really good friends with a full-time analyst, so he took out all the keys in his keyboard and rearranged them alphabetically. But then we realized that that would be kind of like a bad idea, so we like put it back. There was this one time where my friend and I kind of snuck up to the top floor, like the client floor where everything was. And we just like walked around and it was like super cool up there. And then there was also this, after everyone finished their project, like and everyone had that like burden off of their shoulders. Like it was honestly such a great time because they were kind of ramping us down and we didn't have like a ton of work to do. So some of my friends and I literally just in the middle of the day like went to Central Park and like we were considering going to New Jersey, but we are like, actually, no, we should probably head back. But yeah, I think it's like important to like take some time, have fun, develop inside jokes with your friends and, try and enjoy your experience. And I think one thing to sort of take into account is like when you join one of these firms, like you are a very, very small piece of a much larger thing. So I recently saw a news article where like JP Morgan, the firm that I was at, like suffered like some fraud, right? And they're like, oh, we took $175 million loss. And they're like, yeah, that was a couple hours of firm revenue. So I was like thinking, oh wow, like how much, money does this company actually make? And so I crunched the numbers, and every second they make about $5,700. So from when I first started, saying this sentence, they've already made like hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it took the company around 2.6 seconds to generate the amount of money they paid me over my 10 weeks or over my 9 weeks, because I got around 15K after taxes. And so that boiled down to an hourly rate of around 25 bucks an hour, right? And so that honestly is probably like less than you'd expect. It's like a good wage, but less than you'd expect, right? So just remember you are a part of a much larger thing. Like it almost costs them nothing to pay you. So if you need to, take a little bit more time on your walk or, stay a little bit longer in the coffee shop, or you need to take a dump on company time, don't feel any like rush to have to like get back to it if there isn't anything like actively outstanding. And then a couple of like additional pro tips that I have, just wanted to throw in there. I think it's like really, really important to organize your emails in your Outlook, right? Just so you keep track of anything, of everything that you have, because like you will probably get like 200 to 300 emails per day. Whether that's through deal teams or whether that's through just like random internal like firm messages and stuff like that. People in banking use Outlook like it's texting because everything just like goes flying back and forth. So it's really important that you like organize your emails and you have folders for all of your deals and all of the things within those deals. You'll probably get two monitors when you're at your desk. So I like to have like my Outlook and my Teams on one side, and then like what I'm actually working on like in front of me. So then I can kind of see if anything's coming in, and then like still be focused on what's in front of like my face. In terms of like the meal stipend, definitely recommend that you guys use that. Honestly, I sometimes stayed a little bit longer than I had to just so I could cash in on the meal credit. And for your second meal stipend, if you guys do get one, you can use that to save something for lunch and like put it in the fridge the next day. So that's kind of a little hack to save money. I recommend living close to the office if you can, because I think it just like reduces so much like mental strain. Like imagine, you finish at 2 a.m. and you have to commute 30 minutes to go back home. Like I don't think I'd want to do that. I could just walk back and it'd take me like 5 minutes. So a lot of you will either be working in Midtown in New York or maybe like the financial district in San Francisco. And so in both those places, there's this thing called Found Study, which is like intern housing. That's what I use. That's like a place that you could explore if you're looking to find a place to live over the summer. I think it's like really good practice to like check in with your deal teams at the beginning and at the end of the day. So as you're coming in, if you haven't been actively assigned something, just check in with people. It's like, hey, like, is there anything I can work on? And at the end of the day, as people are leaving, check in to make sure there isn't anything outstanding left. Another thing that I would say is like to try to make templates out of as many things as possible. Like if you're doing a task that you repeat very, very often and you do a lot, if you make a template of it, that just makes it way faster. If you have like something that is like the same procedure over time, like so let's say you have to like send a process update every like Tuesdays and Thursdays, right? Just have a document saying like, oh, what is everything that I need to cover, and so you can make sure that you're not missing anything. And in terms of like some questions that I got on the forum, what are some small details that make a big difference? I think like that really just connects back to what I was saying earlier with just making sure that you're communicating really well and managing expectations and keeping a good attitude. I think that is one thing that really like sets interns apart. I think that and someone else asked about like how you avoid like the discomforts of being in banking, like the eye pain or like the back pain and stuff like that. So like I would recommend just like standing around, walking a little bit, going on walks outside if you have some time. And if you have like a standing desk, I think that also helps a lot. What are some mistakes that will jeopardize your return offer? So I think the biggest thing that comes to mind immediately is just like messing up that intern project. It's one of the reasons why someone got cut. And another was just like someone who just didn't have a great attitude. And I think like I don't think any of you will have an issue with that necessarily, but I think those are one of some of the biggest things to look out for. Some mistakes that you guys think might jeopardize your return offer, but actually won't. Interns make mistakes all the time. It is expected. It is a part of the process. So if you output something and maybe like the numbers are wrong or you didn't get some details right, like that's not going to cost you your return. It's like how you deal with that and what you do with that feedback, right? So if you go back and you fix it quickly and be like, hey, sorry about that. I just noted that down. It won't happen again in the future. And you don't make the same mistake twice, like you should be good. So don't worry about messing up, to a certain extent, right? It's going to happen. And that's a part of the learning process. The difference between a good and great intern, I think that even if you are like the most technical intern and you have great modeling skills and you like produce good like work output, if you're not coachable, if you don't have a good attitude, they're not going to want you back. So I think what really makes a great intern is just keeping all of the things that I mentioned in mind and just trying to hit all of that as much as possible. And if you're like well-rounded and you keep all of these different factors at the back of your head, I think that's going to set you up really well to get a return offer. The steepest learning curve that I encountered during the desk, I think like definitely some of the modeling, right? I think like a part of the intention of this program is to get you guys technically prepared for what you guys encounter in your investment banking internship. So I think that was one thing that I can hope to, address through speaking with you guys. Minimizing the number of mistakes you make on the desk, I think that connects back to taking notes and having procedures for things. And that's like a good way to do that. And some other people ask questions about like re-recruiting or group placement, or like what it's like to be like a bulge bracket, for example. And I think that that's something that I can get into, individually because it might not apply to everyone necessarily. So yeah, that is the first part. Oh yeah, what's up?
Wondering AI usage,
Mhm.
that was monitored. I know like technically if you don't have an enterprise account, you shouldn't be using OpenAI, but I've heard some people say like the interns end up using that anyway.
Yeah. So the thing with most like the thing with open or like using an LLM is you're not allowed to use them because if you ask questions that have like confidential information that gets fed into an outside system, right? So what a lot of firms will have is an internal LLM So we had like this older version of ChatGPT that we could use, and it was like safe and air gap so that any confidential information wouldn't be released to the firm. So like if you, I think you guys should use AI during your summers just for like summarizing notes, like understanding things. It's a very helpful tool. But you may be working with like a more limited version depending on the kind of software your firm has. I think I saw a hand go up, Theo.
Yeah, I was curious, like, how the summer went for you emotionally, like, was it really all stressful, or did it kind of ebb and flow, like, good and bad, and also, at any point you had doubts?
Yeah.
About the career path?
I think like the most difficult thing like emotionally was probably just like sometimes like feeling like you're overwhelmed when there's so many things that are being thrown at you. Like the stress of potentially not getting a return offer is also like a pretty big thing. But I think the things that really helped like was just like for one being friends with your co-interns. Like if you just have moments of just like levity, moments of just like laughter where you go and you catch up with people and you like remember to be yourself and you remember to kind of just like let go of work for a second and then dive back in. I think it's very, very important to take breaks and it's very important to chat and connect with people. So I think like over the summer, my mental health was like pretty good, like nothing crazy. Yes, you're working long hours and yes, it is tiring. But as long as you like have a pretty good understanding of like why are you doing this? Like, are you interested in this? That can really help carry you forward. And that's something I'm going to talk about later on in the third section of this. Do I see another hand here as well? Or no? Okay, cool. And so with that, that is sort of that first part talking about the internship experience. Um, I was thinking about whether we should do like a break before we dive into the model and the deck, but if everyone's fine, we can, or it doesn't have any like outstanding questions, I figured we can kind of just move on and keep going. Yeah, okay, seeing general nods. But yeah, and you guys can always feel free to just interject whenever you have any questions about any of the things that pop up. So I think one of the first things that I wanted to sort of talk about and touch on is like what an investment banking like deck really looks like. And so I'm also going to send out some resources so you guys can see like what decks look like in different banks. And so actually I can probably just like pull it up. Yeah, I have this spreadsheet where like you can like check your firm and see like what their slide deck looks like so you can get familiar with their template. For example, if I want to see what like a B of A slide deck looks like, you can just check it like that. But in this case, I'm going to just like really very quickly at like a high level walk through what like a JP Morgan deck looks like. And so this scenario is a sale process for Nordstrom. I'm sure many of you are kind of aware of what this company does, right? And so I'm sure if you looked at this and you kind of looked at my slideshow, you can see a little bit of some similarities there, right? And the reason why I did that is because like if I'm gonna make a slideshow for you guys anyways, like I might as well practice like the firm's format. So like all of these colors that you see are color matched to like the color scheme of the company, right? And so like if you guys have like a slideshow that you have to work on at some point, I recommend just like maybe try doing it in your firm's template, right? So you're a B of A intern, so then you practice making it look as close to this as possible. And I think just like getting a sense of the visual language that your firm has is going to be really important for just like making you fast at things. And so I used to be a really big believer in like Google Slides just because it's like easy to share. But PowerPoint is honestly, I think, like a lot more powerful, and you should like get used to PowerPoint if you can. And UCLA offers free Microsoft Suite, so you can download Excel, PowerPoint to see with your UCLA email. So I recommend that you guys start that as soon as possible, right? And so I think just like walking through this deck, we can get a quick sense. I'm sure you'll notice like, look, the agenda and my agenda, you kind of see the similarities there, right? And so, yeah, this is kind of like what your average company like overview would look like. You'll notice that investment banking slide decks are very dense, right? And that's the way that they should generally be done, right? There's a lot of information. These tend to be like read over. They're often presented, right? But like you want to be able to like read back and look at these things again, right? So there's like a lot of detail. So some people say, oh, you don't want a lot of text on your slides when you're presenting. In this case, you want a lot of information. It should be information dense. Yeah, and then you use things like maps, you use things like these kinds of these boxes and these numbers there, they kind of like stick out at you. And so that's kind of the idea of how you want to like represent things in a slide deck, right? Here you have things about like share price performance. You see that these like different metrics are very well laid out. And so you'll notice again, these are very, very like dense slideshows. And like you want to get good at making graphs that look like this. You want to get good at practicing how to format a slide that looks like this, right? And you'll see like there are a lot of citations down here, which is another thing that's important. Um, and so yeah, I think like overall, the message is you want to have things that like look dense, things that have a lot of information in them, things that are like presented in a way that is like visually clear and very, very like visually organized. So you see the way that these are divided into different boxes, and they show like different pieces of information, right? You have like a breakdown of financials in like a very kind of easy to digest way. You have like projections that look like this. Um, you have like an analysis at like various prices. So like seeing what the firm's value would be at like different share prices. And so that's like a useful point of reference. I think like a football field is something that you guys are all probably pretty familiar with. This is just like a valuation summary of like your different valuation methods kind of showed out here. So it just displays what that looks like. This is what a DCF looks like. Again, there's like a ton of information on screen. And it just like breaks it down very clearly. So I think that kind of gives a good sense of what banking decks should look like. And if you do have free time, like you can even try and just like recreate the deck like verbatim, word for word, like graph for graph. And I think just doing that will help you navigate PowerPoint and understand where things are. And so moving on to the Excel portion of this. So I originally wanted to like actually like show you, yeah.
On the deck for the qualitative information, like company descriptions and things like that.
Mhm.
Where are you getting your info for that? Like, were you just looking on like Yahoo Finance, like the company website, or using AI?
I'd be really careful about like, so I think AI is good for like summarizing information. It's good for like you want to like get a concept explained to you, like learning. I think that's a good way. When it comes to like getting information itself, though, it's tricky because AI still hallucinates, right? Right now it's gotten better, but again, if you're working at a firm with like an internal LLM suite, it's probably going to be outdated, so the capabilities might not be as good. So whenever you have stuff like this, the firms will usually give you things like Capital IQ, or they'll give you like a Bloomberg terminal or something. So you can find like information like this, like how many stores there are, or like how much revenue has grown over time. And like Bloomberg will usually give you like a breakdown of like things like that. With this, you can honestly just like search around online, like chief executive officer, whoever that is, or like whoever the key management people are, and like these overview things. As long as you have like a source that is like, that is like reliable, like that is online, you should be fine. But yeah, that's kind of how I go about the qualitative stuff. But yeah, cool. All right. So yes, originally wanted to show you guys a model that was kind of like inspired by what I learned at the firm, but I learned that apparently that's like a little bit of a confidentiality issue. So like the model that I had is like technically like the intellectual property of the firm, so I can't necessarily like show it fully on here. But I figured it would be helpful to walk through the overall structure of what a fully completed sell side model looks like, and sort of what to keep in mind there. And so with these kinds of models, like you usually have like a cover page, and you have like the people that worked on that model and the different like the color codes for what different things are in the model. So across the industry, it's pretty standard for like anything with a formula to be black text. Anything that's a hard code, so just literally any number that you manually input in there should be blue. Any inputs that you have might have like a yellow highlight behind it. Anything that you're linking from other sheets into another sheet, you want to make that green just to say it's referencing a sheet from somewhere else. Anything that you link within your sheet should be purple. And anytime you have like a table or something like that where the formula changes, you want to mark that as red, right? So why do we do that? The reason we do that is because sometimes it is kind of inconvenient to have to go into each cell to see like what the number looks like. So when you have that information out there and you can see visually, okay, this is a hard code or that's a formula, right? You can see the way that the model flows through, and it helps to sort of organize your thinking. Another thing that a lot of these professional sell-side models have that maybe your investment club DCF does not necessarily have is a control tab. So in that control tab, you have things like, like different cases. So you can switch between like maybe like a management case or like a Wall Street projection case for your DCF. You have things like your company's ticker or like the date that you're valuing the company, because that'll determine the dates in your model. And then you might have things like enterprise value adjustments, so the amount of debt or cash that a company has, so that can flow through to the rest of your model. And so there's that. And then one thing that I don't think I've seen, at least in some of the investment clubs that I've been in, or like some of the student build models I've had, they didn't necessarily have something called a feeder. So what a feeder is, it is a place where you have all of your projections and all like your financial information laid out. So like, for example, your revenue, your EBITDA, your tax rate, or your CapEx, your net working capital. So all of that is laid out so that you can link it into your DCF and link it into your LBO. So instead of having to just like build everything out in your DCF and then just like figure out how you can get like repeat the same information into your LBO, you can have one feeder that feeds into multiple kinds of analysis, if that makes sense, right? So you have your financial information here and that feeds into different sheets. And so that is a helpful way to organize your model. Is anyone familiar with what an offset function is? Gavin? Cyrus? No? Okay. So basically what an offset function is it selects information from another tab. So for example, if you have like an offset that is in this cell, and then you have like offset 1, it'll shift down to the information in there, or like offset 2, then it shifts down to the second cell after that. And can anyone sort of think of why we might have an offset in a feeder? If we think about the way that like a model is structured. Lewis? Vic? No? So why might you want to switch between like different numbers, for example? I guess a little bit like of a closer hint. So like, does anyone have like a sense for why we might use an offset function in a feeder?
See different cases?
Yes, exactly. To see different cases, right? So what you'd have usually at the top is like we are in case 1. So if your offset function is linked to that cell and it's like offset, and let's say it's case 2, it'll be like offset 1, 2. So then you're working with the numbers in that case, right? So that's an easy way to switch into like a different case within, your feeder, and that'll feed all and it'll flow all the way through your DCF and your LBO, right? So like, let's say your case 1, your projections for revenue are super optimistic. Case 2, they are more pessimistic, right? So having an offset function that is linked to a case selector in the top will help you switch cases between different scenarios within your model, right? So that's an easy way to do that. And then you would also have a dilution table, right? So at the top, you'd have different share prices based on the outputs of your DCF and LBO. And on this side, you'd also have like different tranches of dilutive securities. So things like PSUs or RSUs or different stock options. And thinking back, why might we have a dilution table in this model? Does anyone kind of want to throw an idea out there? Chap, what are we thinking?
I don't have an idea off the top of my head.
Okay, Lewis?
Just see how much the stock is valued. I mean, what's the value to each different statement?
Yeah.
Different stacks on the cash flow.
Yeah, kind of approaching that, right? So the reason why we have a dilution table in this model is because sometimes your valuation will output like a certain share price. But if that share price is, say, like above a strike price of a certain dilutive security, like an option or a PSU, for example, right? That's going to change the number of shares that are outstanding. So that creates a circular reference, and you need to kind of be aware of that and turn on like circular references within your spreadsheet. But basically, it shows a different scenario. So like if you have a certain share price, how many shares outstanding are there going to be, right? Because when you eventually build a share price in a DCF, you're going to have to divide that equity value by the shares outstanding to find the price per share. But if the price per share impacts the shares outstanding, there needs to be a place to account for that, right? So that logic is built into this kind of valuation model. So that's another thing that I think is like useful to learn and be aware of. And then I think with like a DCF, this should be like relatively straightforward. You kind of run down from revenue to unlevered free cash flow. And then you have like a terminal analysis. So basically like you can select between different like terminal value cases. So maybe like a more optimistic terminal value case or a more pessimistic terminal value case. Does anyone remember the formula for unlevered free cash flow? Off the top of their head. Fiona? Ethan? How do you get to unlevered free cash flow?
EBITDA minus CapEx, adjust for changes in net working capital and minus.
Not exactly. Coven, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, start with your revenue,
Mhm.
minus your COGS, get your minus SG&A, get your operating income.
Yeah.
Then add back your depreciation, and adjust for taxes minus capex, and then adjust for net working capital, and then you get your unlevered free cash.
Yes, you make the tax adjustment on your EBIT, right? And then
Yeah.
you add your depreciation and amortization, you subtract CapEx, net working capital, the whole shebang, right? So that is essentially the logic of a DCF. So you guys need to be like aware of like kind of how that works, right? But yeah, that's essentially how you walk through there. And then with like after you arrive at unlevered free cash flow, you get the present value of your free cash flows, you sum that, right? And then you add on your terminal value and you sum that, and then that gets you to enterprise value, right? And then from enterprise value in the second kind of row there, you take out that net debt, and that leaves you with equity value. Equity value, that gets you to price per share. So that kind of makes sense? Okay, cool. And then here we get to the LBO. And so kind of like the DCF, it'll start out with a couple of key assumptions. So like, what is your entry multiple? What is your exit multiple? How much EBITDA do we have to leverage? What is the minimum cash balance for this business? What is like the management promote, et cetera, right? And then under that, we kind of have like a financing breakdown. So like, how much in debt are we taking on? You know, what multiple of EBITDA is this debt? What are the rates, and how much is like the amortization? And so that'll fall like immediately under that. And then you'll get to a sources and uses table. Apoorv, do you want to tell me why a sources and uses table is important in an LBO?
It basically tells you where the funding for the deal is coming from and like how that's distributed among the tranches of debt and everything.
Exactly. And Vic, what are some common items that you'd see in a sources and uses table?
You know, senior notes,
Mm-hmm.
junior notes,
Mm-hmm.
revolver.
Yeah.
Debt, and then uses would be like purchase price, and
Mhm.
then fees.
Yeah, exactly. Great. And then yeah, from there you can see like the P&L, and that builds down to ending cash. Bree, do you want to kind of dive into why it's important that we have ending cash here in an LBO model?
Yeah, because you can use it for cash sweeps, paying down debt earlier, distribute it to the firm.
Yeah, exactly. And that transitions us into the next part of what an LBO would look like, which is like how much cash is available for pay down for this tranche of debt and then that tranche of debt. And then you would get into an exit analysis that would sort of indicate what is the internal rate of return and what's the multiple on invested capital of this transaction. And so like slides before this were kind of like, it shows like the high level thing, but I think one output that I wanted to like sort of explain in detail is the ATP analysis, which is what your ultimate LBO output should be. So if you decide to take on the case study that I'm going to present in a couple minutes, your overall LBO output should be this ability to pay analysis, right? So at first it might not be like the most intuitive to understand, but it basically just shows you like what is the implied offer price that we can offer for this company based on the exit multiple if we want to reach a certain return hurdle, right? So if we want this deal to have a 20% IRR and we're exiting at 10 times, what is the offer price that we can offer? It's like, what is the price that we can buy this business for, right? And then so the way that we evaluate that is like we start with that exit multiple up top. We think about how much implied equity value there is at exit based on that multiple, and also based on that required return there. And then you have things like, again, like the sources and uses down there, and the implied overall transaction value to help you determine like what is the overall output of this LBO based on the company's financials and based on the return hurdles that we want to hit, right? So, for example, if we want a 25% required return on this LBO, is that share price that we offer going to be higher or lower than if we just wanted 20%? Noah or Cyrus?
Lower.
Yes, exactly, right? Because if you pay less, your returns are higher, right? So you can sort of see the way that that mechanically works out. And at least when I was at the firm, this is the output page that you would have from an LBO model, right? So that is going to be sent out so you guys can sort of reference that and try and build your analysis around filling out that ability to pay analysis for an LBO. And then after that, you would have the WACC, which I think is like relatively straightforward for those of us that have like already studied the technicals for banking. You know, you have the risk-free rate, cost of equity, you know, you have like the cost of debt and all that, and then you kind of combine that to find your weighted average cost of capital. And then you also have like benchmarks of your public comps to find what are their betas and what are their capital structures to sort of orient your WACC around that. And so, yeah, that is the idea behind kind of the modeling. And again, that's a lot of information to throw at you, which is why I decided to record this so that you guys can go back and reference what I talked about and like walk through that a little bit more slowly. And that's going to be sent out to all of you. And the slides will be there too. Wish I could share the actual model itself, but I think it's also helpful to sort of just talk through that logic and ask you guys questions about that as well. So yes, so I think that this alludes back to something that Theo asked me is like, how did you kind of keep up your mental health? How did you sort of stay motivated throughout this entire process, right? So like all of you are here because you did the hard work of getting like an investment banking internship and you understand that it's going to be like a tough thing to do, right? So I think like one thing you always want to keep in mind is like, why are you here, right? Like, what is it that's going to keep you waking up and going into work every day? And trying to put your best foot forward, right? So what are your ultimate motivations? I think making sure that you're not losing sight of that is going to be very important. And understanding your motivations will kind of help carry you through. Are you prepared to handle the stress, right? As I mentioned, right, like there are a lot of hours that go into this job, right? Your summer internship experience might be easier than mine. It might be more difficult than mine. Again, it depends on your firm. It depends on the city. It depends on the office. It depends on your deal flow. But overall, even in probably like the lowest stress banking role, you should be prepared to work a lot. And so kind of just like mentally preparing yourself, like maybe we don't schedule that many like hangout things with like our friends over the summer because we kind of need to anticipate we're going to be in the office most of the time. And if we have free time, then maybe we can go out with our friends. But we kind of need to prioritize our time now while we're in the internship. So I think just like mentally keeping that in mind is important too. What do you want to get out of the internship? What do you want to get out of the career path, right? I think another important thing to keep in mind is if you do this internship, you are not locked into going back, right? You don't have to go back after you finish if you get a return offer, right? You can say, hey, like I did my summer. I don't think it was for me, so I choose not to go back. Or you can do your summer and choose to go back if it was for you, right? So there is that decision to be made. And it really just boils down to like, why are you in this position in the first place? If you want to get a lot of technical experience, if you want the good exposure, you want to have good exit opportunities, and you're in there to develop yourself and grow as a person, then maybe that's your motivation, and that's something that you can keep in mind. And I think that just helps carry everything forward and like keep you motivated throughout the experience. But I think on the flip side, it's also important to contextualize what investment banking is, and kind of the incentives that drive it. So when you are an investment banking analyst, your incentive is to push out work quickly at a high quality. And whether or not you understand what you're creating or you actually understand the company isn't always like the most important thing. And as an analyst, you are kind of there as a resource. You are honestly highly replaceable in a lot of contexts. So once you feel like you have kind of hit diminishing returns, you've learned as much as you can, you've gotten fast at Excel, you've gotten fast at like, building slide decks, and you've gotten your skills, you can think about whether you still want to be in banking, because at the end of the day, again, it is a client-facing industry. You are acting at the whim of a client, right? And you're there to work for fees. You're not necessarily there to think very much. So if you want to stay and that's the kind of work you enjoy, that's something you can continue doing. But if that's not, like you also want to be aware of that as well. So I think like we don't want to paint too rosy a picture of what banking is, because those are kind of the realities of it. But there are also a lot of merits to staying in that industry for a long time as well. And just within UBS, there are so many other things that you can pursue, right? If you choose not to do banking, maybe you go into other aspects of finance. Maybe you move over to the buy side. Maybe you get into tech or consulting. Like UBS as an organization has a lot of different areas that we can support you in. And I think like the fact that you are in this position where you have an investment banking internship gives you so many opportunities and gives you such great exposure that I think many of these different industries would be like happy to take you on if you ultimately decide that investment banking is not for you. And so now we can get a little bit into the case study, right? So I think that, talking about these concepts and having you guys listen and like take notes, that's helpful for building context, but I don't think like it really gets down to helping you build the concrete skills that you really need to just be quick with it, right? So I wanted to assign this project. And for this project, if you decide to take this on, again, you can come here, you can take in this information, you can choose not to engage with this, and that's totally okay. But if you want to practice your modeling skills, if you want to practice like your ability to build slide decks and do a project that will probably be very similar to what you actually get in your internship, then this case study is probably for you. So in this scenario, we are going to be evaluating a past acquisition from 2019, which is IBM's purchase of Red Hat. And so you want to conduct this analysis as if it is 2018 in October. And your final output should be a valuation model with kind of those elements that I talked about earlier in the model format that I covered, and also a slide deck, right? And that should be emailed to me by February 26th, which I think is exactly 2 weeks from now, right? So just wanted to make that deadline kind of like before final, so you guys don't have to like worry about that, but also, give you guys a little bit of time to work on this if you choose to work on it. And so in terms of the requirements of what I want to see, a company overview, I think that's like a pretty standard thing. Football field analysis, which should be based on, the other valuation analysis that you do in this project. Public comps and precedent transactions, which should be fairly straightforward. A DCF and an LBO as well. And so later on, I'm going to be sending out like a sheet or like a document that dives into these requirements a little bit more in more depth. And if you choose to take this project on, you can just let me know, or you can kind of just start working on it. Yeah. So as we sort of close out, I think there are a couple things I just want to leave you guys with. So again, the session is recorded, so it's on Zoom, and also there's a camera over there so that you guys can come back and refer to this information later if you'd like to see it. These slides will be sent out, and I'll send you guys the case study later on. Feel free to ask me any questions like while we're here or maybe after the session if you'd like. And just remember to submit your case study by February 26th if you are interested in taking part in the exercise. And my email is listed here as well. I also wanted to sort of leave you guys with an action plan, like for what you guys might do like on top of the case study. So basically right now, February 12th, I think a lot of you, do you guys start like June 1st? June 1st approximately, like maybe some people like a week after, a week before that, but June 1st kind of seems to be like the consensus there. So you guys have a lot of time technically to do this and a lot of time to prepare. So I think in February, my personal advice would be to like reach out to people that are already intern or that have like interned at your firm or are incoming. Ideally someone that interned there, so you can kind of get like a sense of like the experience of what they got. And so there is a spreadsheet out there called like the Bruins and Finance spreadsheet that has everybody's placement. So like you can email them or reach out to them and say, hey, like, are you down to chat? Wanted to hear more about your internship experience. And I think like doing that will help like kind of get you good context on like what you could expect going in. In March, I think like you guys can really like start to get really good at PowerPoint. So like building decks based on your company's formats and just like practicing that. In April, I think it's good to do like a little bit of Excel work and just like work on like building out a full DCF and a full LBO, like obviously on top of the case study if you choose to do that. If you have a Windows computer, that would be really, really great practice. And you can find like models and like walkthroughs available online to sort of just like practice that skill as well. And the reason I say like April is probably a better time to do that is because like if you like learn those shortcuts and you pick up those skills, you're like less likely to forget it since it's going to be closer to your internship. So I think that's like a good time to be prepping Excel. In May, maybe you can do like another case study on your own, like independent of the thing I've assigned, like, build out a full deck and build out a full model and see like, if you can sort of combine all your knowledge into one, and you'll have that whole month to do that before you start in June. So yeah, I think in summary, like you guys will all do well in your internships. I think that everyone can get a return offer as long as you kind of maintain the right attitude. You have strong work product, which is something that you can work on by practicing all of these things. And if you're like a communicative person, if you're enthusiastic about it, and you're dependable. And I also recommend maybe like watching through this presentation one more time, in late May or early June before you start, just to get a refresher on everything you need to know. And yeah, let me know if you guys have any questions about the case study or anything I talked about. My contact info is on this side and will be sent out. And you guys have 109 days until June 1st, starting from today. So that's a lot of time, a lot of opportunity to get good at stuff. And yeah, with that, any questions that you guys might have, I will be sticking around until everybody leaves. So feel free to come by and say hi if you'd like. If you didn't already fill out the form, this is the way that I'm going to be able to contact you. So just a heads up. But yeah, thank you guys for coming, and I will be sticking around for any questions you guys have.